You are listening to Awake in Relationship, a podcast about intimacy, community, and culture in a time of great change, with Silas Rose.
Greetings, dear listener. My name is Silas Rose, and you're tuned into another episode of Awake in Relationship. I don't know about you, but it seems like everyone, from stressed out single moms to the tech bros in Silicone Valley, are all singing the praise of microdosing for enhanced creativity, productivity, and well-being. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, microdosing involves ingesting sub-perceptual or fractional quantities of typically LSD or psilocybin. Usually the dosage is 1/5 to 1/20th of a recreational dose. Once vilified, interest in psychedelics, or particularly psychedelic therapy, has really exploded in recent years, possibly in response to a surge in intractable mental health conditions like depression, anxiety, and addictions. We all know someone who's struggling with something. Maybe psychedelic-assisted therapy can help us nudge our perceptual reality towards a more hopeful future. The FDA certainly thinks so. There are a number of high-profile clinical trials happening right now, particularly with MDMA and psilocybin, that promise to make this powerful medicine more widely available. Psychedelics gave birth to the countercultural movement of the 1960s, which is really a period of tremendous creativity and hope. I think our society could use a dose of that right now, which is why I invited back to the show my friend Jim Kragtwyk, a clinical counselor and educator focused on psychedelic integration. In this conversation, we talk about the current research and the psychosocial and emotional benefits of microdosing and psychedelic therapy. Going into this conversation, I was particularly interested in how microdosing might help with lowering the self-imposed barriers to greater creativity, growth, and connection. While I personally feel there's tremendous potential for this medicine for many conditions, I'd be remiss if I didn't also say that this conversation is offered for information purposes only, and not intended to diagnose or offer a treatment plan for anyone. If you're struggling right now, please reach out for help from friends, family, and in particular, a trusted and trained professional. Jim, welcome back to Awaken Relationship.
Thank you very much, Silas. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's been a while since our last conversation, so it might be helpful for the new listeners if you could maybe just introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you do.
I do a lot of different things. I've been a professional helper for about 40 years now, and started off at a very young, even maybe too young age, as a youth counselor, working with young offenders. And throughout that journey, I've done so many different trainings and different sort of therapeutic modalities. I've worked in addictions and forensics, correctional facilities, psychiatric hospitals, outpatient clinics. I run 2 residential addictions treatment programs. But the last 15 years or so, mostly been just, my private practice in Victoria. Also do a lot of organizational work, health and wellness trainings on things like mental health and resiliency and a whole slew of different topics. And also do a lot of workplace interventions, things like harassment investigations, mediating conflict, sensitivity trainings, team and leadership coaching. So, and then that brought me to, my work in psychedelic assisted therapy integration. And that's been, probably the last 4 years now, I guess. Yeah, it's coming up on 4 years where I've been fairly immersed in that work above and beyond all the other things that I do. So, yeah, a little bit about my professional background. So,
Well, what got you interested in psychedelics?
well, when I was younger, I started self-medicating with a variety of different substances. And I didn't know that's what I was doing at the time. It just seemed pretty normal in my family and in the culture of the 70s. Certainly where I lived in Quebec, unfortunately, I remember, being a grade 7 or 8, being able to go to the local dépanneurs, the little corner stores at 8 in the morning and buy a pack of smokes and a couple of quarts of beer and then skip school. So I had a problematic use with substances in the early part of my life. And in the latter sort of stages, and probably going back like 15 years now, sort of re-engage with psychedelics particularly, and more so in a very intentional and sacred way. And those connections of working with different teachers and different medicine groups, got me an invitation to do some psychedelic assisted therapy training. And even then, I wasn't really thinking I would get involved in the work at all. I was just really curious about it, looking for any opportunity to do some fun trainings that have an experiential component to it. And also, this sort of delves a little off course, but, I really learned that when things sort of like come to me right in my face as invitations to not ignore them. And this was one of those things the training was. There's one spot left in the training. The week that we were doing the experiential piece was the 1 week I had in my calendar that weirdly was really open during the busy time of my year. So I took that as a sign from God that I was meant to step into this training. Little Blues Brothers reference there. And it was a wonderful experience, and that the whole experience of meeting some really wonderful people really encouraged me to step into the work. Whereas before I was just wanted to have that experience. And so I've been doing that work for about 4 years now.
So what do you mean by integration work? What does that mean?
Well, when people have intentional psychedelic assisted therapies sessions or journey days or treatment days, you can call them, those can be very powerful and profound experiences. But, in the research and certainly my own personal experience is sustainable change for whatever people are looking for is really in doing the integration sessions after the sort of the plant medicine ceremony or after an individual session with a therapist. I use the sort of analogy or the metaphor that, the psychedelics gives you a new doorway of opportunity to see, feel, experience things in a different way, to see new possibility of patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving. And so all those old patterns sort of get out of the way and gives you this opportunity to sort of walk through the doorway. But if you just open the door and don't do the integration work, then that door closes. And on a more neurochemical level or behavioral level, we go back to homeostasis. We go back to our usual way. We had this wonderful peak experience. Oh my gosh, it's wonderful. And then it fades. And then we think, oh, I need to do another journey. And so some people think the medicine is the actual pathway, but in fact, it's actually the integration. So that's where we really want to focus on. How do people take these maybe big illuminations, intensely beautiful, powerful, transformative, emotional experiences, and how do we now bring that back into my marriage, my relationship, my job, my day-to-day? How do I make those incremental changes so I don't impulsively blow up my past, leaping onto something without a net and then finding myself, oh my gosh, I really shouldn't have done that. So how do we do it in a sustainable way? Yeah.
So it's essentially kind of the difference between a recreational experience and a therapeutic one.
Mm-hmm. I would say so. And for me, it's all around intention, right? And I don't have any judgment on people using things recreationally, and certainly don't have any judgment on people self-medicating with certain substances. They usually don't self-medicate with psychedelics. Usually it's more harmful substances. But again, that's always an indication that, an individual's neurochemistry is not balanced. And on some level, they're stumbling upon substances or behaviors that, give them a little temporary respite from the pain, from the anxiety, a little boost of pleasure, energy from the depression. And so people can go down that path of self-medication, which can then turn into, addictions or compulsive behaviors, which are hugely problematic. So always aware of the positive intention of the medicines, but we have to use them in the right way and get the sustainable results we want.
It really seems like, psychedelics have gone mainstream. It's pretty radical turnaround from where we were, particularly in the 1990s, the war on drugs. What do you think has precipitated that?
Yeah, well, I think, this very, I don't even want to use the word naive, that's being kind. This perspective that we had that, these substances and drugs are, evil and we need to declare a war on them. I mean, that whole narrative is completely made up. And it's just the quick fix, short term, just say no. Like, it's a very simplistic way of engaging in a problem. And, when you read up a lot on the history of this, like a lot of this was political, a lot of this was racial, a lot of this was economics of why the war on drugs was actually put in place. Because all the research, exceptions noted, there's always going to be, some bad experience that someone's going to happen. And certainly that happens with pharmaceuticals as well, right? You want to look at the numbers of actual deaths that people experience by the appropriate use of pharmaceuticals. You might be ridiculously shocked at that number. And then, if someone has a bad trip on some LSD or whatever else, it's like, oh no, we have to like stop all these substances from, affecting our youth. So basically, I think that people realized that this war on drugs was not actually working, in fact, making things worse. And that, the researchers and, what we like to call the psychonauts from, the 50s, 60s, and 70s, they were still operating. They were operating underground. They were still practicing. They were still doing, some level of research, and so it reemerged, which was sort of lovely to see that that's happened.
How has the legal terrain changed?
I mean, subtle. I mean, they've, certainly in Canada and in the US, they've allowed clinical studies on things like psilocybin and MDMA. With a narrow focus, typically on dealing with sort of end-of-life anxiety or complex or treatment-resistant PTSD. I know in the province of British Columbia, certain substances have been decriminalized with certain amounts. You can sort of see now in BC that, the mushroom shops or the other psychedelic shops are popping up. There's all kinds of things online where people can access these medicines. So yeah, I'm seeing it mushrooming, no pun intended there. But at the same time, people were very hopeful back in the day, and all it can take is one shift of politics for the plug to be pulled on that. I don't know if this is an organic emergence that's going to keep taking over mainstream culture. That's what we thought was happening in the '60s, and powers that be came in and really stomped on that. So I hope that as things emerge, that we're going to do it at a much more slow, gradual pace so that people won't get too, use the clinical word freaked out, won't get too freaked out about this, because there's still a lot of judgment and stigma and distortion and myths about, a lot of psychedelics. So I really hope that, people are going to be doing this slowly, that there's going to be a lot of evidence base around the benefits of this, that we're going to get all the key stakeholders, the medical system, politicians, general public on board. So this will just be a fairly normalized standard of treatment, hopefully someday.
Yeah, well, it really seems like there's a world of need at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I think, there's definitely a mental health crisis on our streets that's not being addressed. What kind of inspired this conversation, or me wanting to reach out for this conversation, talk about microdosing? Because it really feels like, from the billionaire tech bros to the single moms, that many people are kind of taking this as kind of a new approach to mental health and well-being. So for basic definition, what is microdosing?
Well, basically, it's taking a dose at a level that you are not consciously aware of any sort of, psychological, emotional, or physiological experience that is very, very subtle or can be very subtle. So typically, we're, looking at different models of microdosing, whether it's on psilocybin or LSD, we're basically looking at anywhere from, 1/10 of the standard dose to maybe 2/10. And so for psilocybin, that would typically be, 100 to 200 milligrams. And I think the most common protocol is, doing that every third day.
Mm.
And then for LSD, it could be, either 100, maybe 200 micrograms. I have, this morning, I was actually looking at some studies where they were giving people 500 milligrams of psilocybin, which for me is more than a microdose. Like you're going to consciously feel that experience. So, so then we have to go into, well, how are we going to collectively define microdose? But generally speaking, it's on a sort of subconscious level that the medicine's doing its work.
Mm.
Now, there's a nuance or complexity there. Like, so I'm going to put another context. So if you know anything about homeopathic remedies, right? You're giving very, very tiny doses of something to sort of stimulate a response in your nervous system. So in many ways, it's similar to that. Now, in terms of homeopathic doses, I know some people, and I was probably one of them, and maybe still am. It's just like, take a little bit of this, and it's like, nothing's going on. I don't feel anything. This is ridiculous. This is a bunch of woo-woo stuff, bunch of hippies, whatever, like all the judgments come out. But with the microdosing, and I would say even with homeopathic medicine, it really is, it's about relationship.
Mm.
So if I have with sort of the allopathic medicine mindset is, no, I'm passive, I'm going to be treated, someone's going to do something to me and magically I'm going to get fixed up somehow. Well, with the microdosing, really, it's about your relationship with the medicine. And if you want it to work, and this has certainly been my experience with clients and also on personal use, like if I'm not actually paying attention, if I'm not like dropping in and listening to the subtleties of what's going on in my physiological, emotional, psychological arousal, right? If I'm just like, I'm going to take this capsule and get on with my day, but I'm not actually like, going in and meeting the medicine, noticing sensations, noticing subtle shifts. So for me, the medicine of microdosing is actually the paying attention and the relating to the medicine consciously.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How does that differ to, say, a macrodose, or what is the effect over the long term?
So what is the effect of the microdosing over the long term?
Compared to, say, macrodosing?
Right. Well, most people can't sustain, macrodosing every third day, so to
Of course.
speak.
Yeah.
Right. If you got a job, you got family, maybe you can. I don't know. Right. So the microdosing is something that, you could do a microdose and still go to work ethically, legally, not impaired in any way. But you might notice these subtle sort of changes. And so when you start orienting to the medicine, then I keep using this word relationship, like I'm staying focused with it. I'm learning how to be in my body. I'm noticing, oh, there's just a little bit of an uptick in my energy today. Or, I didn't get so angry today. And then we start to see, and then that creates hope. And then creates more consciousness to really relate with the medicine, right?
So are there any kind of contraindications, if you're mixing with other things?
Not at that level, not at that small amount.
There's a lot of hype around the benefits of microdosing.
Mhm.
And you mentioned depression. Depression is the leading cause of disability in the world at this point. What does the research have to say around microdosing for depression specifically?
And so, particularly with people who have depression, and I've certainly experienced this in my lifetime in significant levels, like big piece of that is you don't have energy. You don't have a lot of hope. You sort of have a negative, sort of cynical outlook on things like, it's just not going to get better. And so it's really hard to sort of create some momentum from that place of feeling really stuck and no energy and no positivity, right? So the microdose can just like be that like a little fire, right? That little spark that gets the flame going. And then we can start tending that flame with, okay, now I'm going to start to actually connect with some more people. I feel like I've got the energy, or maybe I'm going to do a little bit more, looking at my journaling and my thinking processes that keep me stuck in this depressive loop. And so again, it can just shift us from being stuck into a place of movement. Mhm.
I've noticed that myself in the sense that it's interesting. Like I'm an infrequent flyer, as it were, when it comes to microdosing.
Mhm.
But when I do it, I actually notice the bump the next day, which is interesting. I'm not too sure why.
Mhm.
But the main benefit for me is actually in creativity. I guess there's something about it that gets me into kind of a flow state.
Well, when it shifts your perspective from cynicism, hopelessness into creativity, I mean, we're definitely in a different software package here.
Mm.
It's very difficult to actually think creatively when I'm looking at the world or myself in a cynical, hopeless kind of way. I mean, it's just not available, right? So immediately when we shift our perceptions of how I see myself and myself in the world, then that when creativity, and with creativity comes different ways of being hopeful about what I can do. And as you're suggesting, that when I'm in those creative states, that I get into that flow state. And for me, the flow state is I'm purely in the present moment. I am not thinking much, if at all, about the past nor about the future. Like if you're like for me, like my most common flow moments are when I'm in nature and when I'm training martial arts, particularly doing partner exercises. Like all those years of training and programming, thinking they all come out in the moment, and I'm just going along for the ride. It's like, something's possessing me, so to speak. And it's quite a beautiful thing. And I know people can have that with music. They can have it with meditative states. They can skiing, golfing, like whatever it is. But for me, that clear essence is in the present moment. You're going along with it. You're not creating it, intending it. Like you just find yourself in that state and you ride those waves.
Yeah, I think part of that is just this kind of lessening of fear. And you mentioned this a bit earlier, talking about connection. It'd be interesting to kind of drill down into that a little bit more.
Mhm.
Is, microdosing used within, say, couples therapy or as a tool for accessing deeper intimacy?
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes when I'm talking with clients who are thinking about doing a journey, and then they're looking to me to support them with the integration piece, I'll encourage them to consider try microdosing first. You may find you don't need to have a big therapeutic treatment day or journey. That's just might tip the scales for both of you. In addition to you're going to do some couples counseling or go on a retreat or whatever else. So in terms of the relationship, yeah, when people have maybe done enough work, maybe they've stretched out and slowed enough of their trauma triggers so that they can actually stay in the pocket of responsivity in their relationship, the psychedelics on the microdose level can help them maintain that bandwidth. Because oftentimes, when people come for counseling, they don't usually come in just for like, oh, you want to, do a preventative sort of check-in like we do with our car. Most people are coming with big problems or crises. Okay, and so you want to help them stretch out their trauma triggers, because that's usually what's going on for people. Someone's inadvertently doing or saying something that pushes someone's trauma trigger button. They become more reactive. That triggers this person's, and then all of a sudden, you can't actually resolve anything because they're living in the past with all these trauma inundations in the present moment. And so this gives the people capacity to stay in that zone of responsivity while they're working out their trauma as a couple. I used to rebel at the notion that a lot of my more seasoned therapists and colleagues would say, because I was young and cocky and thought I always knew better, but they always said, healing has to come in relationship. And I was always thinking, no, you got to go do your own work first, and you got to, take care of this, and not jump into some relationship and try and figure it out. And it's just because I wasn't understanding it. Absolutely, it's great for me to work on my own trauma and to create more capacity. But ultimately, the proof of the pudding is when you're in a relationship, you're going to get triggered. And so can you actually deal with your triggers and be responsive enough to stay in relationship and heal, right? So the proof really is, can you actually integrate this when you're in a relationship, not just clean up all your relationship stuff and stay out of one. So all that to say, the microdosing can support people to have that ability to be more responsivity, to be creative in their ways of thinking about the relationship, creative strategies, playfulness, all those wonderful things.
MDMA seems to be the kind of relational psychedelic, though I guess technically it's not considered a psychedelic, yeah?
It does fall under the cluster, and then certainly at strong doses, you can get your typical sort of psychedelic effects, but it's also known more as a sort of entheogen or empathogen, right? There's big heart opening medicine, which really helps with the relational piece. It sort of softens our defense structures, our emotional armor, our, big triggers, and, can give you these beautiful, warm sensations of love and connection and openness and feeling safe. But when we open that heart, it could also release a lot of unprocessed grief. So, when we work with people, they've had these beautiful, amazing, lovely, pleasurable experiences, and some have used it to actually process some old grief.
So much changing in this field of psychedelic therapy. When do you see things going in the next 5 years, and what role do you think you'll be playing then?
Oh, I think AI is going to take over everything doing all this psychedelic work.
That's another episode.
Yeah, well, I'm sort of joking and I'm sort of not. So I was contacted, this is about 3 weeks ago, by a startup company based in BC. And not sure how they tracked me down, but they wanted to know if I'd be interested in being part of their team, being a clinician to facilitate the psychedelic assisted therapy sessions. And so their model was that all the formal protocol, the full-on intake, preparation session, set and setting, all the integration stuff. The therapist, like myself, would do that work virtually, and that the client would do the psychedelics on their own with a sitter of their choice. So I'd prepare them. They would go and do this just with a sitter. It could be a friend, could be whomever, and then I would do the integration after that. So I told him, I was like, I'm not sure. I gotta sit with that for a bit. I think a lot would depend on the sitter, and even in the sort of appropriate protocols, there should be two co-therapists in the room on journey day. These are people who are trained, and so if you're just having a friend or a sitter and there's only one, there's just some risks involved around that. So that's where I see a bit of a trend happening. Certainly the medicalization of the psychedelics is already happening, with ketamine. Like there's Roots to Thrive here in the island. There's also another clinic that's going to be opening up shortly in Victoria. I forget the name of it, Sammy or something like that. So it's happening. Will it take the heart and the spirit and the soul out of this work? This is one of the things that so the more traditional or underground therapists have thought is like it's taking the sacred out of it if we medicalize it and make it institutionalized. And yet, at the other hand, it'll make it more accessible to people if it is medicalized. So we have to balance these things, right?
Is there a kind of resource, a book or a documentary or something you think people would find inspiring so they can keep the learning going?
Well, I mean, the two biggest ones that are sort of out there mainstream, I mean, there's a lot, but, Fantastic Fungi, I think, is just a beautiful film. And it's not just on the psychedelic element of fungus, full spectrum, but it's just a beautiful film with lots of great visuals and just a magical thing to watch. And then Michael Pollan's, How to Change Your Mind, obviously, that four-part series, I think, still on Netflix.
And how can people get in touch with you?
I'm very Googleable.
Excellent. Well, thanks again for the conversation, Jim.
All right. Thank you, Silas, for inviting me. Have a great day.
If you want to learn more about Jim's work, he can be found at kragtwyk.com, as well as LinkedIn and Psychology Today. I'll be sure to put some links in the show notes at awakenrelationship.com. If you found value in this episode, I'd really appreciate it if you took a moment and just left a quick review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Even better, consider forwarding it to a friend who might also find value in this conversation. If you have any guest suggestions or feedback about the show, hit me up on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Substack. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. If you made it this far, dear listener, thank you so much for lending me your ears. Till next time, stay connected.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Awake in Relationship. If you liked what you heard, please click subscribe to get the latest show delivered fresh to your device, or sign up for our newsletter at awakeinrelationship.com. Sharing is caring.